say good evening today to our listeners on the podcast Our Byron Community, because we're doing a first for us, which is a live recording at a small event. And our guest tonight is Andy Hamilton. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Chris.
We always on our podcast, and I did this in the early days of the podcast because it was the easiest way to get a conversation going. So we always ask people what their story is and how they ended up being in this part of the world. And the people usually split into two categories: those that were born here and those that came from somewhere else. What's your story, Andy? How did you end up sitting in that chair?
I'm one of the come from somewhere else, and from listening to your podcast, it's really a short story, but I came from Melbourne originally, and I actually ended up here. Well, the short version is I ended up here to recover after being hit by a truck. So I'd been riding my bike to work one day in Melbourne and got knocked off by a truck, and it kind of formed a massive kind of transition and change point in my life.
How old were you when you got hit by the truck?
I was 28 at the time.
And you were doing what down in Melbourne?
So I had studied both psychology and politics, so double major in psychology and political science, and I'd been very interested in both the micro and the macro, so really understanding human psychology and what drives people, but also the societal and socio-political context that people exist in, and really felt that often those two disciplines had neglected talking to each other as much as they could, and so there was a passion to bring those together. And I'd graduated in psychology and done an honours degree, and during my uni degree I'd also become heavily involved in human rights activism, particularly in relation to East Timor, and had spent several years going back and forward to East Timor, including prior to the independence vote there. And so I had a strong passion there in the political side of things. And at the time of that accident, I had actually been sick for a while from having dengue fever from my last visit to Timor, and had been struggling to recover. And that was kind of a final straw for me. I was working in the mental health industry at the time and working with adult psychiatric patients, and I guess that had been another strong passion of mine.
I've asked so many people this question, including someone I interviewed for a job this afternoon. Why here? Like, why do people choose here? Why did from Melbourne to here? Was there a specific reason you chose the Northern Rivers?
Like many people, I'd heard about Byron. I had actually passed through here a couple of times, but hadn't really dropped in.
No schoolies for you?
No schoolies for me, no. And the reason I came here was because I'd had this accident. I'd fractured my shoulder blade, my collarbone, broken most of the ribs on my right side, collapsed my lung. I was a bit of a mess, and I was recovering in a house in Brunswick in Melbourne, basically staring out the window in a bed at a brick wall. And friends of mine were coming up for a holiday in a house in the rainforest out the back of Nimbin, Tuntable Creek, and they were heading up for 2 weeks to kind of recover from city life, and it just felt like the perfect opportunity for me to get out. So I came up for that. I had no intention of moving up here, and I had wanted to get out of the city for a long time, but was involved in so many things there that I just felt like it wouldn't happen, and I think those 2 weeks really changed me, and I actually happened upon. Through a series of coincidences, I met a man I'd known about, a bit of a legend in the East Timor human rights scene in Nimbin, who had a house out the back there, and he had been back from East Timor. He was working for the UN over there, and had been back from East Timor and was looking for someone to rent his house, and had been cleaning it up. And I said, well, he described the place, and I said, I'm not your person. My life is in Melbourne, but I'm curious to come and have a look. And over the next couple of days, I couldn't sort of ignore it, and it just kept tugging at me. And I eventually got someone to drive me up there. And as soon as I saw this place, I just knew I was going to live there. And I ended up spending 2 years up there, down the end of a valley, overlooking the mountains at the back of Sphinx Rock there, and living in the rainforest, waterfall in the backyard, and focused very much on my recovery and healing over that time.
We interview lots of people and ask them that question, and you were wrong. It wasn't a short story, and it was a good story. And I'll tell you this weird thing, everybody here. This afternoon I had a woman about the same age as you were in my office, and she wants to work with us. And I've heard this, what I'm about to say to you, all of you here, so many times. I said, like, you've been here lots of times, haven't you, before you decided to move here? She said, no. I said, let me guess, you came here for schoolies. She said, yep, that was her only trip. Now, I've met so many people over the years, one trip. And sometimes you're talking to them 20 years later and they just have this memory from schoolies. Like, go figure. Like, I'm surprised some of them can remember schoolies and so on. Let me go to something else that was of interest to me there. Just go back to the politics and the psychology. Remind me again how those two go together or went together in your head. Like, to me, I don't mean this in a rude way, but in a blunt way. One is all about caring, the psychology part of it. Politics, maybe it is, and in the human rights area, I get that. But did you, when you did that double major, somehow think that the two things would go together in your career, is what I'm trying to get at, in your profession?
It was the fact that they didn't seem to go together that bothered me. And it bothered me because, we tend to look at individual human beings and the troubles they are facing in isolation, and they're not in isolation. We're in context. We're in the context of our environment. We're in the context of our social setting, our upbringing, and all of those things influence that. And I'm not saying that, psychologists and psychology is ignorant of that. Of course, they take that into account.
Yeah.
But systemically and as a discipline, it's those kind of understandings seem to be lacking. And likewise in politics, they tend not to take into account enough, I think, the story of the individual and the meaning of what's going on in our world for individuals. And I felt really passionate about bringing those together, and that's kind of remained for me.
After the couple of years living up the beautiful valley, and I got that picture, it's a good picture, you painted that very well, I'm going to guess you found your way back into your profession or a version of what you'd been practicing in Melbourne. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I'd been in Melbourne. My job before that accident had been working in the psychosocial rehabilitation sector, so working with both adults and young adults in the psychiatric system, and providing support to them outside of the system. So very early on, I took that job because what I could do was actually, I was given a caseload and a car and a mobile phone and back then in Melways there was no Google Maps. And I could basically do whatever I felt would best support those people. And so what I quickly found was finding the nearest green space was one of the best things I could do, and in terms of supporting them and their mental health, and also doing things with them really allowed me to form a relationship with them, a relationship of trust, which was, a crucial thing to do any real solid therapeutic work. And the other thing that really hit me in that time is on a systemic level, at least back then, and that's 25 years ago now, we really weren't talking about trauma, and we were talking, it's very much a dominant medical model for mental health, and the predominant treatment was medication, and everyone I was working with, it didn't take long to scratch a little bit below the surface and find out that they had childhood stories that were full of trauma and disadvantage, and often quite horrifying, and they didn't get the support they needed. And then from there, other things happened. Addiction happened, further trauma happened, homelessness happened, social disengagement happened, and then they end up, kind of the worst of the worst in our society, people right down the end of the psychiatric system. And when I came back up to the Northern Rivers and got back into work, I went initially into probation and parole, so working in the justice system, and then drug and alcohol, and I found exactly the same thing. So people who are ending up in these systems, again, had those traumatic stories and didn't get that support, and there they were in a place that's pretty hard to come back from.
Everyone I've interviewed over the years, including people like Matt Knopfs, early or some way during the conversation or when I read their books and so on, trauma's in there and it just jumps out at you and it seems so obvious that it's hiding in plain sight like so many things. And I'll talk about trauma in a minute, but can I go back to the green space thing?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess if you're in cities, it would have been less likely that you would have found that as the natural place for you to help people and to take them into that space. But what was it in you that took you to meet with those people in those green spaces? Because that's hugely innovative, and going into offices of doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists is, to me, I would have thought for young people would have been traumatising in itself. So where did you come up with that idea?
Well, it's partly where I wanted to be for myself, and I knew that that's what made me feel good.
Yep.
And, you know, we know now it's very much in the mainstream. The evidence is strongly borne out that exposure to nature has strong mental health and physical health benefits to us.
Yep.
But I guess in childhood, my parents were pretty good at taking us out into nature, and we went camping on holidays, and I got involved in Venture as the kind of older adolescent version of Scouts, pretty reluctantly, mind you. I was, you know, teenagers often don't want to do that kind of thing, and I was sort of shoved into it, and then suddenly found myself on weekends going, you know, on canoe trips and sailing and rock climbing and doing all these amazing things. So I had a strong appreciation for that side of things and what it could do with me. And I was, you know, I'd say looking back, I would have been a troubled teen in my own way. I struggled with, you know, what I would call depression now.
Yep.
And I think that's something that really pulled me through. In the profession, we talk a lot about, you know, it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but people have either risk and protective factors, and obviously the more risk factors you have, the more likely things are to end up badly for you, depending on the protective factors you have. And for me, I think that protective factor really carried me through.
Does that come from parents? Is that where protective factor works? Where does that
it comes from everything. It comes from, you know, ideally, you know, as a well-developed human being, we would have you know, all of our physical and material needs met. We'd have a warm and loving family who are, you know, good enough parents. So we all struggle. We all have our stuff, but good enough parents to provide that love and support and healthy attachment. And then we would have a community around us to provide those extra adults in our lives, those extra curricular supports and the sense of belonging, the sense of meaning, the sense of purpose, opportunities to do things to contribute to our community. That would, you know, the conditions for creating healthy, functioning human beings. And as we know, those protective factors aren't there for many people, and many other risk factors are there. And I suppose for me, that's throughout my career, that's become more and more obvious that the people who are most troubled in our society are the people who've had a lot of those risk factors and a lot less of those protective factors, and we need to shift that balance. And when we talk about that intersection between politics and psychology, you know, again, the evidence is really firmly established around the social determinants of health. You know, people with poor socioeconomic status have poorer health outcomes, poorer employment outcomes, poorer life outcomes in general, poorer income outcomes, and you know, it's been my passion for a long time to shift that balance.
I'll come back to balance, but let's fast forward a little bit for context so people listening to this can understand the amazing work you and your team have done. Fast forward to what exists now, human nature. Just give people listening to this an idea of what human nature is and what it does.
Yeah, I'd say now we're very fortunate to have a thriving youth mental health service that works with young people across the Northern Rivers region. We work with about 130 young people a year, and young people who are specifically targeted as some of our most vulnerable and at risk. So those who, you know, the way we describe it, are most likely to end up in a difficult place, and they're identified by schools and services, you know, principals and heads of welfare and juvenile justice, people who've been in the field for a long time, and who know from looking at a young person that that's not going to end well. And they know where those young people end up. And you can talk to those career, particularly people in education, who will be able to tell you that. And what we strive to do is to provide the support they need to them before they end up in that really bad place, and prevent that happening. And for us, it's not just about preventing the poor outcomes for those individual young people, but interrupting cycles of intergenerational trauma and disadvantage. As I said, that early in my career I saw happening time and time again. And one of the things that I think has led me to work very much with people of the age we do, so we work with 14 to 18-year-olds, is that age window is the time where the balance really tends to shift from people's life trajectories being determined by what has happened to them in their life to what they do with what's happened to them. And this applies to both people with comfortable lives of privilege and people who have really struggled. And so if you're had a life of privilege and comfortability, around that age, we know that some young people have, you might call it a failure to launch. They've got all the right circumstances, they've got the protective factors there, but for whatever reason, maybe the risk factors, things that have occurred in their life, particular struggles they've had, have led them to not succeed in life. And for other young people, the risk factors are so high that often the way they cope, one of the ways we cope with trauma when we don't have support and care and assistance around us is to self-medicate, to escape from pain and struggle. So we end up with drug and alcohol problems, behavioural problems, disengagement from community and school, all of those things. So those young people across the region are the ones we're targeting, and what we do with them is, I guess we've acknowledged, and I've seen in my career many times over, that for that particular cohort of young people, many of the services that currently exist and are provided by our government they're just not purpose-built for them. They are well-intentioned, but they tend to still be very much in a rigid clinical model of a psychologist sitting in a room for a 50-minute session. And for those vulnerable young people, that setting doesn't work for them. And so what we do is break that model apart, essentially, and we go to young people, we work with them, doing whatever it is they want to do, and wherever possible we work with them in nature and do fun, adventurous activities. So we've got a way of engaging with them, a way of providing an opportunity for them to, I guess, reignite their life, and at the same time have really experienced mental health professionals working with them where they otherwise wouldn't be.
I hear and see so many examples, not just in the mental wellness space, but in so many other places where we've either got the data or we've got the answers, but we keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Now, what you've just enunciated there, it seems pretty clear to me. We've got all these amazing teachers, and I'm someone who believes that the teachers and nurses and the aged care workers keep the country going, and on so many levels. And experienced teachers have this knowing. And you described it perfectly before. They can look at a kid, doesn't matter the background, doesn't matter the school, and there's a knowing with them in 5 minutes that young person's headed for trouble. So they work in conjunction with you, by, for want of a better word, pointing that young person out. Explain how the process works, how they go from the school. I'm going to guess parents bring them to you, but who taps you about them? How does that work?
So it may be the school, it may be youth services, justice services, community services, and so they'll contact us, and often they'll say, we've tried everything and nothing's worked, and this kid really needs support, and we're worried about them. And when we say that it's not going to end well, it's not that they're doomed to that path.
Yeah.
If they don't get support, it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And the safety net that is provided is unfortunately a very wide safety net with a lot of holes in it. And so the school may have referred them to the school counsellor. No, I'm not seeing a school counsellor. Or they've seen them and that hasn't gone well for whatever reason. They may have some specific groups for young people that are struggling that they may or may not attend, and it may not have succeeded, and there's not much else for them. Kids in our out-of-home care system, very early on in this region, I started working with kids in out-of-home care, and these are kids who've had some of the worst, trauma and attachment wounding that you can imagine. They need therapeutic support, and a lot of the out-of-home care agencies can't get them to that support because their whole lives they've been in a system, and they've been interviewed and interrogated by psychologists, psychiatrists, lawyers, caseworkers, and they don't want to sit there and talk to anyone who wants to talk with them about their stuff. And we found early on, this is a whole other story, but when we started running long expedition programs, 10-day expedition programs, these kids wouldn't do therapy, they refused to do it, but they'd agree to come on this exciting adventure.
I'm with them, and what happens then, you've brought me naturally, thank you, to the next question I was going to ask you. Like, what do you do? And you got this lovely phrase that I saw the other day in some of your material, the pace of trust. So what happens on the long treks with these young people that don't want to have therapy, but what happens and happened to transform and help them?
Well, I guess there's a lead-in. So generally we would go and meet with them and connect with them. They're often still very reluctant to even engage in a program like that. And I've learned over the years that the reason they're reluctant is not because they don't think it might be a good idea, but all of the things that might not be good about it that they don't know. And so it's easier to say no than to say yes to something.
You mean they're scared of what they have to do or say there?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff?
What are the staff going to be like? What are the other young people going to be like? Are they all going to be really naughty, or are they all going to be really boring? Are they going to be bullies, or am I going to be the odd one out?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a boot camp? Is it going to be a brat camp? That's the stuff they've seen on TV. That's absolutely not what we do.
Yeah.
The evidence shows very clearly that not only is not psychologically beneficial, it can be harmful. So we've got to sort of undo all those stereotypes and help them to feel comfortable. So there's a relationship being formed, and mostly that's about understanding where they're at and what they want for themselves. So forget about what the school wants for you, forget about what mum and dad might want for you. What do you want for yourself? How's life going? And how could it go better?
It's questions based?
Sometimes it's very different for every young person.
Yeah.
The beauty of doing the activity-based stuff is you don't have to talk about them and their problems. You can talk about the activity and what's going to get you there and why it might be good for you, and the conversation can happen around that. Once we're actually there, then there's a chance to, when you say work at the pace of trust, to actually form a human relationship that isn't, hats off to psychologists that do it and can do it, work with struggling adolescents in the conventional model, but it's pretty tough to engage a young person in a clinical setting in a 50-minute session to talk about their issues. If they're there because they really want to get help, great, go for it. You've got all the tools and everything you can do to support them, and there's really strong evidence that therapy works. But if they're very resistant to that, then you've got to form a relationship. And so going on a journey together where we're all having to work together to make that journey successful, and when it's climbing up a mountain with a hiking pack on and helping them feel safe in that environment and feel supported in that environment, and giving them an opportunity to help other people. I might fall over and they might help me up. They might fall over, I help them up. We're cooking dinner together, we're talking to each other about their lives, and we get to form what we call a really strong therapeutic alliance. And that's the foundation for doing that later work.
Transformation. What is it, in your observation and knowing and experience, having been doing this for years, what is it that is the major contributor to the young people, the ones who find a way out of whatever it is that's challenging them? What is it? Is it, for example, the communal trust they build up with you and the team? In your observation, having watched this and experienced this over the years, what are the things, they must bring a smile to your face, I'm going to guess. What are they?
Well, if we stick with this understanding, which I do very strongly, that a lot of these problems result from trauma and disadvantage, what trauma, and particularly complex trauma, so trauma upon trauma, does to a human being, and particularly a young person who is forming as a human being, so they're going through adolescent development, is interrupt an internalized sense of safety in the world. You know, we talk about self-confidence, self-esteem, all of these things. That comes from feeling safe in yourself and safe enough in the world that you have a normally functioning threat response that can operate. I guess it's attuned to the level of the environment around you. So, you know, if I was sitting here right now, you know, waiting for a band of thugs to come through the door with baseball bats, I'd be pretty anxious and nervous. But I know this context is pretty safe. I'm not expecting that, and I can relax and have a nice, comfortable chat with you. If my threat response has been highly activated over many, many years, and I'm constantly in a state of that, then you asking me these questions is probably going to feel like a bunch of people coming through the door with baseball bats, and I'm going to be reactive, or I'm going to withdraw, or a bunch of other things. And so, you know, there's not a lot of opportunity for transformation there.
Yeah.
So what is transformation? It's initially creating safety for those people, and then supporting them to internalise that sense of safety so that they can be safe in the world and operate. You know, I guess allow their higher functioning to come back on board, and for them to catalyse the innate genius that I think we all have. You know, we all have capacity to operate well in the world and to give our gifts, and but not when we're locked in a state of fight and flight.
When you have, as you have worked in that space for a long period of time, and other people of your team done exactly the same thing, how do you protect yourself working in that space as a professional from what must at times be stories and trauma that get right inside you very deeply? How do you do that in that space?
Yeah, it's a challenging one, and it's often a lifelong journey for most people in the profession. We have an incredible team working with us at the moment, and you know, we put a lot of supports around them because they are doing very difficult work in the community. For me personally, you know, I've had to burn out a few times to really learn.
I was going to ask how many.
A few too many, and then had to kind of put myself to get back together. I mean, I've over the years, meditation practice and things like that have been really strong tools for me to bring me back to myself. But often, when things are most stressful, and you know, like you know, a week at the office for us can mean, you know, young people who have attempted suicide, self-harming, you know, reporting horrific abuse for the first time, all sorts of things going on, and bouncing from one to the other. Those kind of self-care practices can really fall away. So we need to provide a protective structure around ourselves and our staff. But I think one thing that people not working in the field don't understand, people have often, friends have often said to me when they've heard some of the stories of the things I've experienced at work, have said, wow, that must be really hard and traumatic, and it is. Vicarious trauma is a thing. But there's one thing is that when you're right in front of the person experiencing that, you're not experiencing that. So you feel blessed and lucky, actually. So really internalising that helps. And the other thing is that we have a direct feedback loop. So we get to walk alongside them and experience that healing and transformation directly. See those wins in their lives. See them being successful. You know, we've witnessing that is an honour and a privilege, and is very humbling, and is fuel. You know, the things that really wear me down are the bureaucracy and I guess having to fight for the right to do this work and fight for the funds to do this work. That to me is heartbreaking, because we shouldn't be in that place at all.
When the floods happened here a few years ago, I remember reading all of this material to try and understand how we, in so many other areas when they're hit by floods, are not prepared. And I read models of other countries, whether it was Switzerland or the Nordic countries, who seem to be so organised on so many levels. But I remember reading this number that's never gone out of my head, and then I found out the mental health space was very similar to disasters, in that we spend 97% of the money in disasters cleaning up afterwards and 3% in prevention. And then someone in the mental health space was telling me that's sort of about the same as what happens. When you got a model like yours, and I'm very cognizant of how bureaucracy and so on is frustrating, and your model works, and I'll return in a minute to a question related to that, why do we continue to invest in the wrong end or give most of the money to the wrong end of the challenge here and not give more money in the prevention space?
Well,
politics?
I'm not an economist, but
yeah.
or a politician, but I'd say economics and politics.
Yeah.
And you know, and I would add to that a lack of foresight. You know, many wiser people than me have said it many times before me, but you know, we spend all this time, you know, on the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, and we don't stop people going off the cliff in the first place. And on one level, I get it. You know, where there are limited funds, you're not going to stop. You're not going to have no ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You need that. And unfortunately, we've let this problem go so badly that there's a lot of that needed, and that system is broken and falling apart. You know, people don't realise how poorly it's performing because it's under-resourced itself. And so then to put money into prevention is the most sensible thing to do, the only thing that's going to prevent people going off that cliff, and something that governments don't prioritise and enough. Certainly in the sector, there's a lot more talk about prevention and early intervention, and there's a lot more lobbying towards that happening. What I'd say we do is, you know, I'm a big advocate of, you know, going much further upstream, yet that's not happening. So we're kind of standing at the top of the cliff, at that edge, trying to stop the people who are right on the edge from going off. And so that's our focus. And so what we do is targeted early intervention. So we're very specifically honing in the resources we have on those who are most likely to end up in the worst places. Because if we don't do that, you know, tragedy ensues. And so we're trying to prevent that, and that's our mission and our passion. There should be a lot more of it, and we should have a lot more capacity to do it. We're working with, you know, a very small proportion of the people who could really use our support. We turn people away every day, and we turn people away every day with really, really tragic stories, and that's really unfortunate.
Andy, why is it in our modern world where we have all of the tech and we have a wealthy country and we have so many things that even 20 years ago you look now around and the world our world anyway is a good and healthy place? Why is it when I look at stats that, and I think you referenced a study that you talked to me earlier about, but why is it that our young people in particular, the mental health challenges are going up, not down, in an era where we've got plenty of funds and plenty of money, but the numbers are scary for young people in terms of the way the graph's going, aren't they, for mental health?
Yes, they are, and the numbers are scary for our society. So, you know, these are it's big questions you're asking me, and to have answers to them, I think there is no one easy answer. Like, people will often talk about, you know, the digital world and the impacts that are having, and certainly I think, you know, the extent of screen time combined with the impacts of the COVID lockdowns in this particular generation right now are massive in terms of the consequences for a whole generation. But when we look at more specifically those traumatised young people, and then, you know, you look at the news, it's all talked about as though it's siloed. We've got a youth crime problem. We've got a massive domestic violence problem. We've got addiction problems, massive addiction, drug and alcohol problems. We've got massive mental health problems. All of these things are, in my mind, related to intergenerational trauma. And as I said previously, we have to interrupt those cycles of trauma. The study I mentioned before is one that still when I talk to people, they haven't heard of it. It came out last year. It's the Australian Childhood Maltreatment Study. We've all seen the stats about mental health and all these consequences, and we know it's bad. But this is the largest study of its kind done, and it found, I don't have the exact numbers in my mind, but around 1/3 of adults surveyed over the age of 16 experienced childhood maltreatment. So experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, exposure to domestic violence, a range of other things they've studied. So around over 40% of people have been exposed to domestic violence. These numbers are shocking. This should be something that we are all up in arms about and going, we have to completely refigure society around this, because this is over 1/3 of us have experienced those kind of traumas. So why do we have those consequences coming out in our young people? Because we're not dealing with these issues, and we need to. And we're doing our little part here. Instead of going back to where we started with that intersection between politics and psychology, we're doing our best to really turn the lives of individual young people around in our region, and that's really important. But the bigger work we're doing is that big picture work of interrupting those cycles. We know that most perpetrators have been victims of some kind, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And so if we don't provide support to those victims before they become, before all these compounding traumas happen in their lives, before what they do as a result of, which is being informed by the trauma, as a result of the trauma, defines their life, then we're going to have generation upon generation of these problems.
It's not little thing that you do. It's grand and wonderful thing that you do. And those 130 young people a year, not only are they improved by it, but so is our world. Which brings me to the most significant thing in an interview or a discussion like this. It's story. And what changes people's lives, or what I've learned over the years that changes their lives, is a story of someone that you can change the name in this instance here, but I'm sure people out there are thinking or would love to hear a story of people, whether it's an individual or a group of people that you've worked with over the years, that you've seen come from, let's call it not so good a spot, to a healthy and happy life at the other end. Run us through someone who sticks in your mind, a particular person who's human nature, done your courses or come in and had your help, and tell us a little bit about that person that you remember, their journey.
Surprisingly often I find this question really hard because every single young person we work with has a story, and that story is really significant. And actually some of the most profound outcomes are some of the most kind of humble and aren't really interesting stories, because they're those young people that were clearly identified as heading for a bad direction, and then they didn't go there. Life just went okay from there. They're doing all right, and that's they're the success stories really. But we absolutely there are, generally when we have the worst stories, then they have the most dramatic outcomes. And I'm not kind of into sort of case studies or rote stories so much. So I'll just tell you, Jack, a clinical psychologist on our team, walked in the office at the end of the day yesterday, and I'm going to get emotional talking about this because he had just done a catch-up session with a young person we've been working with for a couple of years. And when you said working at the pace of trust, we try and be as efficient as possible with the work we do. But some young people need a lot of support, and so we'll stick with them for as long as we can, whilst really trying to get them hooked in with other support structures in society, so we can help other young people who are more vulnerable. But this young person had a particularly bad story. He, in the lead up to the floods, was not leaving his home at all, not leaving his bedroom barely, and Jack would go to the house on a weekly basis and at the invitation of his mother, sit outside the bedroom door and chat to this young person through the bedroom door. it became apparent that he'd actually experienced childhood sexual abuse, and he was smoking bongs, he was smoking weed every single day. He was coping with that. He couldn't deal with the world. Through those conversations with Jack, he eventually came out of the bedroom. They started going on drives just through the bush. This kid wanted to go on the back roads because he didn't want to see anybody who he might feel was threatening. He was that scared of the world. He eventually came on a little 3-day camp we ran down the coast at Jerusalem Creek, and it was just canoeing down the river and hanging out on the beach with a bunch of boys and staff. They were fishing and hanging out, and that was at the end of the first day. He really wanted to go home. The staff supported him, and he stayed. And those 3 days were the longest period he had been without smoking weed since he was, I think, 10 or 11 years old. He was 16 at that point. He then came on a 5-day expedition, which I ran, a 5-day hiking expedition. Massively nervous about it, but because he'd done the other one, he knew he could do it. He was super stoked to come. That was the first time I'd met him, and he actually came up to me and thanked me for what we'd done just to even get him out of the house. In the meantime, his home got flooded. Everything got destroyed. The family were already struggling. They lost everything. They were homeless for a long period of time. Eventually ended up in one of the pod villages, and they're still there now. In that period of time, he had those 5 days of not smoking for that period of time. That was the longest he'd ever done. Had quite a few hiccups continuing in life, because they do. But over the last year, he has since given up drugs completely. He's been clean, but he went back to hibernating in his room from the trauma from the floods. Didn't leave for a long time, and Jack's worked with him to get him his driver's license, his ID, his Centrelink, get him all these basic things sorted out, which is a clinical psychologist doesn't normally do. But sometimes those actions can be the most therapeutic thing for a young person. So he's gradually worked through with that stuff. And Jack saw him yesterday. He's hadn't seen him for a while because we've wrapped up working with him. He's got a job. He's out and about, and he said to Jack, "I'm just happy all the time." And you've never seen a picture of depression like that before. You really haven't. Like, it's so withdrawn and so shut down. And this kid he said, "I'm just happy." And that to me is gold. That's why we do this.
I think the story you just told us is gold, Andy. I don't think anyone who heard that story won't be impacted by it. And if you feel it's difficult to tell it, you need to tell it, or stories like that, often, because I think that resonates with people more than anything else. Before I finish here and ask you the question we always ask people at the end, tell us your favourite places on the North Coast, there's one other thing I wanted to ask you. I'm very interested in trust and the topic of trust, and that wonderful line, the pace of trust. When you work in the field that you work in, and I'm of the belief that my view is you can't teach someone to be trustworthy, but I've got no scientific basis for that, right? When you see the people that work in this space with you, like your clinical psychologist, Jack, and others that work with you, what is the quality that they have and that they bring to their work that allows them to build trust with the young people and then make the progress? What is it in them? Is it their words, their body language? Is it their demeanour? Like, what is it?
It's humility. It's not being an expert. It's not knowing. One of the things we say is it doesn't come from us, but that the person is the expert in their lives. They are the world expert in their own lives, and we can't presume to be that. And that stance carries a lot. Nobody likes to have someone come in and tell them, who they should be and what they should do with their life. Heart, a lot of heart. So really being there because they're caring, and our staff absolutely do that. You know, we're a small community not-for-profit. All of our staff could certainly get paid more elsewhere in the health sector and in other places than we can pay them. But they're doing it because they're doing it for the love of the work. They're doing it because they really want to make a difference. And yeah, I think they're the big ones: humility and heart.
They're two wonderful words, and I get that. I'm going to guess they're all special people as well.
They certainly are.
Yeah. And let's finish by me asking you, when you're not doing good work, and you do amazing work, when you're not doing good work and you want to have a space or unwind, where and what do you do when you're not doing good work?
I love a good bushwalk.
Yeah. So your folks got that into you early, and you've remained a bushwalker through all of your years. Yes,
I do. Yeah, it doesn't happen enough. I have a 3-year-old, and often I spend a lot more time at the desk than doing adventures these days. So trying to stay fit and healthy. A bushwalk's a good one, and chucking the 3-year-old in the carrier on the back, kind of get more value out of it with 15 kilos on my back.
I was going to say, they're big by the time they're 3.
Yeah. And in terms of favourite places, I've heard other people on your podcast who are equally as hesitant to reveal their
secret spots.
Their beautiful secret spots. But, you know, some of the really well-known ones, Minion Falls is an epic location. The falls are incredible. The walk down through the rainforest is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And that whole Nightcap Range is incredible. And, there's actually a 4-day hike being built through there at the moment, which will, expose the world to some of the secret spots we've been enjoying for a long time. So I'd really encourage people to get into the rainforest out there.
Andy Hamilton, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all our listeners, and I'd be very surprised if everyone who listens to this podcast isn't as moved as our audience is here. Thank you very much for the good work that you do.
Thanks, Chris.